13 of the most expensive electrical engineers in the country were currently drowning in their own panic, huddled around a terminal that refused to speak back to them. The city power director was a man broken by the very technology he'd built his career on, his face a mask of pale, sweating defeat as he stared at a city of 3 million people that had just been erased from the map. They called it a total system blackout, a digital death sentence that would take days to diagnose while hospitals ran out of fuel and the streets descended into chaos. I didn't have a degree in advanced power systems or a seat at the executive table, but I had a heavy-duty wrench, 20 years of mechanical intuition, and the specific memory of how this grid's physical skeleton was actually bolted together. I wasn't there for a boardroom meeting. I was there to save lives before the generators gave out. Sometimes the biggest experts are blinded by the screens in front of them, forgetting the iron and grit that truly holds our world together. You're watching Highway Stories Untold. When the world turns a blind eye to the truth, strong souls like you step up. Drop your experiences in the comments and inspire the fight. I didn't need a radio to tell me the grid was down. When you've spent 20 years listening to the rhythm of the road, you develop a secondary nervous system that's tuned to the hum of the infrastructure. That hum was gone. I sat there in the dark for a second, my hands still light on the wheel, feeling the cooling metal of the shifter. It felt like the whole world had just held its breath and forgotten how to exhale. I reached for my heavy-duty flashlight, the one with the knurled grip that's seen more miles than most people see in a lifetime, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the cabin, hitting the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. Outside, the night was aggressive. Usually even in the deepest rural stretches, there's a glow from somewhere, a farmhouse, a distant tower, the moon. But the clouds tonight were like a lead lid, and with the city's heartbeat flatlined, the darkness felt physical, pressing against the glass. I hopped out of the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel. Other drivers were doing the same, their flashlights flickering like fireflies in the gloom. There was a low murmur of confusion, the kind of nervous energy that starts as a ripple and ends as a tide. "Hey, Redline," a voice called out. It was Miller, an owner-operator I'd shared coffee with a few states back. He looked pale in the white light of his torch. "You seeing this? My GPS is fried, my phone is just a brick. What the hell happened?" "It's a total collapse, Miller," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. Not just a transformer, the whole sector went dark. I looked toward the city. It was a ghost. Somewhere in that darkness, hospitals were switching to generators that wouldn't last forever. Traffic lights were dead, meaning intersections were becoming graveyards. Refrigeration was failing. Panic was probably already starting to boil in the high-rises. I didn't plan on being a hero. I was hauling a load of precision medical components to the university hospital on the north side. If that hospital stayed dark, those components, and the people waiting for them, were in trouble. I climbed back into the rig. The electronics were dead, but the mechanical heart of the Pete was a different breed. I bypassed the main relay, a trick I'd learned in the motor pool back in my army days when we had to get a deuce and a half moving under EMP simulation. The engine groaned, a heavy, metallic protest, and then it roared to life. The vibration felt like a prayer answered. I didn't take the highway. The highway would be a parking lot of stalled commuters and panicked suburbanites within 20 minutes. I knew the backhaul routes, the service roads that follow the high-tension lines. It's a specialized geography only truckers and linemen really know. As I rolled toward the city limits, the scale of the disaster became clearer. It wasn't just a blackout. I passed a substation near the industrial park. Usually those places hum with a quiet, lethal power. This one was silent, but through the chain-link fence, I could see the charred remains of a switching gear. It hadn't just tripped. It had been forced to ground with enough current to melt the housing. That's not a malfunction. That's a signature. I reached the perimeter of the City Power and Water Command Center about 40 minutes later. The place was a fortress of concrete and glass, now looking like a tomb. There were two National Guard Humvees at the gate, their engines idling, headlights cutting through the dark. A group of men in suits and high-visibility vests were huddled near the main entrance, their silhouettes frantic against the emergency floodlights. I pulled the rig up to the gate. A young guard stepped forward, hand on his holster. He looked like he was about 19 and terrified. "Move along, sir. This facility is under emergency lockdown," he shouted. I leaned out the window, keeping my hands visible on the wheel. "I've got a Class A load of emergency medical supplies for the north side, and I'm guessing your director is currently staring at a screen that won't turn on. I'm not here to argue. I'm here because I know why your grid just committed suicide." The guard hesitated. He looked back at the cluster of people by the door. One of them, a man in a rumpled white shirt with a tie pulled loose, looked up. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the defeat in his posture. That would be Elias Thorne, the director of City Power. I'd seen him on the news plenty of times, a man who prided himself on smart grid efficiency. Right now, his smart grid was $1 billion paperweight. Thorne walked toward the gate, his face illuminated by the guard's headlights. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last hour. "Who are you?" Thorne asked, his voice cracking. "We have 13 of the best electrical engineers in the state in that room. They've been over every line, every relay. The system is unresponsive. It's a total firmware wipe. We're looking at days of manual resets while the city burns." "You have 13 experts looking at software," I said, climbing down from the cab. I stood my ground, my shadow long and steady. "But you didn't build this grid. My unit helped lay the foundation for the regional backup corridors 20 years ago. You're looking for a digital ghost. I'm looking for a physical bridge." Thorne looked at me, really looked at me. He saw the grease under my fingernails, the veteran's hat, and the way I wasn't shaking. "Director!" A younger man ran up, holding a tablet that was barely flickering. "The hospital's backup fuel is at 20%. The pumps are failing because the pressure regulation is tied to the main grid. We need to do something now." Thorne looked at the kid, then at the dark city, and then back at me. "The engineers say it's impossible. They say the central hub is fried." "The hub is fine," I said, stepping closer, "but your smart switches are designed to fail-safe. Someone sent a surge through the bypass loop, and the system did exactly what it was told to do. It locked itself in a loop of safety protocols. You can't talk to it through a computer. You have to talk to it with a wrench." "Show me," Thorne whispered. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. I grabbed my heavy tool bag from the side locker of the Pete. I felt the weight of the iron and the steel, the only things that still made sense in a world where the lights had gone out. I followed Thorne into the belly of the beast, leaving the idling truck as a lone beacon in the dark. The inside of the command center felt like a pressurized chamber. Every surface was brushed steel or reinforced glass, illuminated by the jittery bluish glow of portable emergency LED banks. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the sour tang of collective anxiety. In the center of the main floor, a horseshoe-shaped desk was crowded with men in expensive shirts. These were the experts Thorne had mentioned, PhDs from MIT, systems analysts from Silicon Valley, guys who could map a power grid in their sleep, but had likely never held a pair of insulated pliers in their lives. They didn't even look up when I walked in. They were too busy shouting over each other, their voices echoing off the high ceilings in a frantic, dissonant chorus. "It's a cascading logic failure," one shouted, slamming his hand on a dead console. "The handshake protocols are being rejected at the hardware level. We need to rewrite the initialization script from the cloud backup." "There is no cloud backup," another yelled back, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. "The relay nodes aren't pinging. If we don't bypass the firewall, the whole north sector is going to stay dark until morning." I stood at the edge of the circle, my tool bag hanging heavy from my shoulder. I watched them for a minute. They were looking at the problem through the lens of their degrees, searching for a ghost in the machine. They were treating the grid like a website that had crashed, something they could fix with a keyboard and a Control-Alt-Delete. Thorne stepped into the center of the group, his hands raised. "Quiet! Everyone, listen! This is Jack Mercer. He's here to help." The room went silent. 13 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I saw the look. It was a mixture of confusion, condescension, and a little bit of hidden terror. To them, I was just a guy in a grease-stained jacket and work boots. I was a relic of an analog world they thought they'd evolved past. "A trucker?" one of the younger engineers asked, his lip curling just a fraction. He had a lanyard around his neck that probably cost more than my first rig. "Director, we're dealing with a sophisticated cyber intrusion or a massive firmware corruption. We don't need someone to change a tire. We need someone who understands the architectural complexity of a level 4 smart grid." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him, the kind of look you give a rookie who's trying to back a trailer into a tight spot with his eyes closed. "Your level 4 smart grid is built on top of a 1970s iron skeleton," I said. My voice was low, carrying that weight of the road. "You've spent all night trying to talk to the brain, but the brain is in a coma because the nervous system just felt a shock it wasn't prepared for. You're looking for a line of code. I'm looking for the physical bridge." "There are no physical bridges anymore, Mercer," the kid snapped. "Everything is solid state. Everything is automated. The manual bypasses in the basement haven't been touched in 15 years, I replied, stepping toward the center of the room. "I know, because I was on the team that installed the heavy-duty copper shunts when the university hospital was first tied into the regional loop. You think your software controls the flow? It only controls the gates. If those gates are jammed by a physical surge, your software is just shouting at a brick wall." Thorne looked at the kid, then back at me. I could see the director's mind working. He was a bureaucrat, but he was also a man who knew his city was dying in the dark. "The basement is flooded," Thorne said, his voice trembling. "The cooling pipes for the main transformers burst when the pressure dropped. The sensors say there's 3 feet of water in the vault. It's a death trap. If you touch anything down there and the ground fault fails, you're cooked." "The sensors are dead, Director," I said, "and I've waded through worse than 3 feet of water to get a job done." I turned and walked toward the heavy steel door marked Sub-Level 4, High Tension Hub. "Wait!" the young engineer called out, stepping into my path. He looked indignant, his pride wounded by the fact that I was ignoring his expertise. "You can't just go down there. You don't have the clearance. You don't have the PPE. You're going to cause more damage." I stopped. I was a foot taller than him, and I'd spent the last 12 hours behind the wheel. I didn't have time for a debate. I reached out and gently but firmly placed my hand on his shoulder. I didn't squeeze, but I didn't have to. The strength of someone who moves 80,000 pounds for a living is different from the strength of someone who moves a mouse. "Son," I said, my voice like gravel under a heavy load. "People in the ICU at Northside University Hospital are breathing because of a machine that's currently running on a battery that has about 20 minutes of life left. Your clearance doesn't mean a damn thing to them. Now you can stay up here and keep arguing with a dead screen, or you can get out of my way." He stared at me for a heartbeat, his eyes wide, and then he stepped aside. I pushed the heavy door open. A wave of cool, damp air hit me, smelling of rust and stagnant water. The stairs led down into an absolute lightless abyss. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting a path through the gloom. "Mercer!" Thorne called out from the doorway. He looked smaller now, the weight of the blackout finally crushing him. "The engineers say it's a 7-hour manual reset, if we can even get the nodes to talk. We don't have 7 hours. "Give me 7 minutes, I said. I started down the stairs. The sound of my boots on the metal grating echoed up through the shaft, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat in the silence. As I descended, the temperature dropped. I could hear the sound of water, a steady, rhythmic drip, drip, drip that told me the leak was significant. I reached the bottom of the stairs and my boots splashed into cold, oily water. It was halfway up my shins. My flashlight beam swept the room. It was a cathedral of old-school power, massive transformers, thick bundles of copper cable as thick as my thigh, and rows of heavy iron switching levers that looked like they belonged on a steamship. This was the physical heart of the city. The smart grid lived in the cabinets upstairs, but this was where the actual lightning was tamed. I waded through the water toward the back of the vault, toward the emergency shunt cabinet. I knew exactly where it was. In my mind, I could still see the blueprints from 20 years ago. The engineers upstairs thought the system had been corrupted. I knew it had been bridged. I reached the cabinet and pulled the heavy iron latch. It groaned, resisting me, but I leaned into it, using my shoulder for leverage. With a metallic crack, the door swung open. Inside was a mess of charred components. A massive surge had indeed hit this point, but it hadn't come from the grid. I saw the receipt right there, a small blackened device that didn't belong. It was a remote detonated grounding strap, a high-tech sabotage tool. Someone had physically come down here and jumped the main safety loop to the ground. That's why the software was failing. It was trying to clear a fault that was being physically maintained by a piece of hardware that shouldn't be there. I reached for my heavy-duty insulated wrench. I had to remove that strap without touching the live bus bar. If I slipped, the current would go through me and into the 3 feet of water I was standing in. I took a breath, slowing my heart rate. I thought about the road, the long stretches of blacktop where one wrong move means a jackknife. I thought about the hospital on the north side. I leaned in, my flashlight held between my teeth. The water was cold, my legs were numb, but my hands were steady. I positioned the wrench. "Steady, Jack," I whispered to myself. Suddenly, the door at the top of the stairs slammed open. "Mercer, get out of there!" a voice screamed. It wasn't Thorne, it was the young engineer, but his voice was different now, sharp, panicked, and dangerous. I looked up. He was standing on the landing, silhouetted by the emergency lights from the hallway. In his hand, he wasn't holding a tablet. He was holding a heavy industrial flare gun, and he was aiming it straight at the gas main that ran along the ceiling of the vault. "I can't let you fix it," he shouted, his voice cracking with a strange, manic energy. "The disruption has to be permanent. The system has to be replaced. We need the new contract." The experts hadn't failed to fix the blackout. They were the ones who had caused it. The orange glow of the flare gun's safety being flicked off was the only light on the landing, and it looked like a demonic eye watching me from the dark. The young engineer, the one who'd been so worried about architectural complexity, was shaking, but the barrel was steady enough. Behind him, I could see 2 of the other specialists. They weren't trying to stop him. They were standing there like statues, their faces cold and calculating. "Step away from the shunt, Mercer," the kid hissed. "You don't understand the scale of what's happening here. This city's infrastructure is a bloated, rotting corpse. We have the federal grants lined up for the Phoenix Initiative, a total system replacement, hundreds of millions in contracts. But for the Phoenix to rise, the old bird has to stay dead." I didn't move my hand from the wrench. The water was pressing against my legs, cold as a winter creek in the Alleghenies. I looked at the gas main he was aiming at. If he fired that flare, the secondary methane buildup from the sewer backup would ignite. We'd all be vapor, but the vault would be slag. The city would stay dark for months. "You're talking about people's lives," I said. My voice was low, vibrating in the cavernous space. "There are kids in respirators. There are elderly folks in high-rises with no heat and no elevators. You're willing to let them die for a contract? Progress requires sacrifice," he snapped, his voice hitting a frantic, glass-breaking pitch. "You're just a dinosaur, Mercer. You're a man who moves boxes from point A to point B. You don't see the horizon. Now take your hands off that iron and wade back to the stairs, or I'll turn this basement into an oven." I looked past him, up toward the door. I knew Elias Thorne was up there somewhere, likely being held back, or lied to. I also knew that my truck was parked outside and that my dashboard camera was currently uploading a live feed of the facility perimeter to my company's secure server, a standard safety protocol for high-value medical halls. But that didn't help me here. 3 stories underground. "I'm not moving," I said. I didn't say it like a challenge. I said it like a law of nature. The kid's finger tightened on the trigger. "I'll do it. I swear to God I'll do it." "No, you won't," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward through the water. The splash was loud in the silence. "Because you're an expert in complexity, son. And complexity makes you soft. You've spent your whole life looking at simulations of risk. I've spent mine living in it. You're calculating the odds of that flare igniting the main. I'm calculating the 3 seconds it'll take me to submerge before the pressure wave hits." I took another step. "Stay back. You want to know the difference between us?" I asked, my voice gaining a hard, metallic edge. "When I see a problem, I fix it because it's the right thing to do. When you see a problem, you see an opportunity to exploit. That's why you'll never pull that trigger. You're too invested in the after. You want the money, the prestige, the phoenix. You can't enjoy any of that if you're a charcoal briquette in a flooded basement." I saw the doubt flicker in his eyes. It was just a second, a tiny crack in his resolve. "That's all the road ever gives you, and it's all I needed. I didn't go for him, I went for the work." In one fluid motion, I slammed the heavy-duty wrench onto the grounding strap. The metal-on-metal clang echoed like a gunshot. I didn't just turn it, I sheared the mounting bolt clean off with the kind of leverage you only get from decades of tightening lug nuts in the rain. The grounding strap fell into the oily water with a hiss. "No!" the kid screamed. He pulled the trigger. The flare didn't hit the gas main. In his panic, his aim drifted. The magnesium projectile hissed through the air and slammed into the concrete wall 3 feet above my head, showering me in white-hot sparks that sizzled as they hit the water. Before he could reload, I was moving. I'm not a small man, and moving through 3 feet of water isn't fast, but I had the momentum of a runaway freight train. I reached the base of the stairs just as the 2 other engineers tried to bolt for the door. "Thorn!" I roared. My voice carried the authority of a sergeant major on a parade deck. "Lock the upper landing, now!" I grabbed the stairs, pulling myself up out of the muck. My boots heavy, my lungs burning. I reached the landing just as the kid was trying to scramble past his companions. I reached out, grabbed the collar of his expensive shirt, and slammed him against the steel railing. The flare gun clattered to the floor. "The grid is clear," I growled into his face. He smelled like expensive cologne and cheap fear. "Your digital ghost is gone." I shoved him toward the stairs and looked up. Elias Thorne was standing at the top of the flight, flanked by 2 National Guard soldiers who had their rifles unslung. Thorne's face was no longer a mask of defeat. It was a mask of cold, bureaucratic fury. He'd heard every word through the intercom system I'd surreptitiously keyed on the wall when I first entered the vault. "Director," I said, wiping a smear of oily water from my forehead, "you might want to check the offshore accounts of the Phoenix Initiative stakeholders. I think you'll find where the cascading logic failure actually started." Thorne looked down at the 3 engineers, who were now being zip-tied by the guardsmen. He then looked at me. I was dripping, exhausted, and covered in the filth of his city's underbelly. 7 minutes, Thorne whispered, looking at his watch. Suddenly, the overhead lights didn't just flicker. They surged. The massive transformers in the room behind me began to hum, a deep, resonant vibration that I felt in my marrow. It was the sound of a city coming back to life. Up the stairwell, I could hear the distant cheers of the staff in the control room. I walked past Thorne without a word, heading for the exit. "Mercer, wait," Thorne called out. "The hospital, the north side. They're reporting full power. The surgery wing stayed online. You saved them. I don't know how to thank you. We'll have a check cut for your consulting fees immediately. Name your price." I stopped at the heavy glass doors that led back to the world. I looked out at the horizon. A single line of amber light was beginning to crawl across the skyline as the streetlights roared back to life. "I don't want your money, Thorne," I said, my voice tired. I've got a load of medical supplies in my trailer that's already 30 minutes late. You want to thank me? Tell your guards to clear the path to the north side. I've got a job to finish." I stepped out into the night. The air felt cleaner now, the ozone replaced by the smell of rain and the beautiful mundane sound of a city's heartbeat. I climbed into the cab of the Pete, the dashboard lights glowing a steady, reliable green. But as I pulled out of the gates, I saw something in my side mirror that made my blood run cold. A black SUV with no plates was idling at the far end of the service road. As soon as my headlights hit it, the vehicle flicked its lights twice, a signal, and began to follow me. The Phoenix wasn't just a contract, it was a nest. And I had just stepped on the eggs. The black SUV wasn't trying to hide. It hung back exactly 3 car lengths, its headlights like twin predatory eyes in my side mirror. I knew that tactic. It's called pressure pacing. They wanted me to know they were there, wanted me to feel the weight of their presence until I made a mistake. But after 20 years of hauling through ice storms in the Rockies and navigating the tightest alleys in Chicago, I don't rattle easily. I shifted the Pete into 10th gear, feeling the familiar, reassuring growl of the engine. I had a job to do first. I pulled into the ambulance bay of the Northside University Hospital 10 minutes later. The facility was glowing, every window a beacon of light against the city's lingering gloom. The chaos of the blackout had subsided into a focused, frantic hum of recovery. I didn't wait for a crew. I jumped out of the cab, threw open the trailer doors, and started pallet-jacking the medical crates toward the loading dock. A head nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Gloria, met me at the edge of the dock. She looked like she'd been through a war. "You're the driver from the power center?" she asked, her voice breathless. "I'm the driver with your freight," I said, sliding the first pallet into place. "Keep the paperwork for later, Gloria. Just get these inside." The temp control on these units was pushing the red line. She looked at the crates, then back at me, a sudden fierce gratitude breaking through her exhaustion. "The ventilators never stopped. We don't know how." The director called and said a man with a wrench saved the city. I didn't think he was literal. "The world is held together by more than just code, Gloria," I said, securing the jack. As the hospital staff swarmed the trailer to finish the offload, I stepped back toward the cab. The black SUV had pulled into the far end of the parking lot, idling near the oxygen tanks. The driver's side window was tinted, but I could feel the gaze from behind the glass. They were waiting for me to be alone. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a chase. I pulled my satellite phone from my pocket, the one I keep for dead zones in the Yukon, and made a single call. I didn't call the police. In a city where the Phoenix Initiative had already corrupted the power grid's top engineers, I didn't know whose payroll the local cruisers were on. I called a man named Miller, the owner-operator from the rest area. "Miller," I said when he picked up, "you still got that CB key to the emergency band?" "Yeah." Redline. "Lights are back on out here." "What's the word?" "I need a convoy shield at the Northside University exit. I've got some suits who think the road belongs to them. Tell the boys it's a code 4, Integrity Hall." "Say no more, Jack. We're 5 minutes out." I climbed back into the Pete. I didn't look at the SUV. I just put the truck in gear and rolled out of the hospital gates. As soon as my tires hit the pavement, the SUV surged forward, losing the pretense of subtlety. They pulled alongside me, trying to edge my front bumper toward the reinforced concrete divider of the overpass. It was a professional pit maneuver attempt, executed with a heavy vehicle meant to shove. I didn't brake. If you brake in a heavy rig when someone's squeezing you, you lose your steering geometry. I accelerated. I let the torque of the big diesel engine take the hit, the steel of my lug nuts grinding against their reinforced rim with a shower of sparks that lit up the cabin. The SUV swerved, the driver surprised by the aggression. They tried to pull ahead to cut me off, but that's when the horizon changed. From the dark entrance of the I-95 on-ramp, 6 sets of high-intensity LED light bars roared to life. It was a wall of chrome and steel. Miller was in the lead, his Kenworth roaring like a lion, flanked by 5 other rigs. They didn't hit their sirens, they hit their air horns. The sound was a physical force, a thunderclap that echoed off the high-rises. They moved with the precision of a drill team. 2 rigs swerved in front of the SUV, 2 moved to the rear, and Miller stayed on their flank, pinning them against the shoulder. In 10 seconds, the black SUV was boxed in by 400 tons of unstoppable momentum. I pulled my rig to a slow, controlled stop 100 yards ahead, right in the middle of the bridge. The other trucks followed suit, forming a perfect, impenetrable ring of steel around the intruders. I hopped out of the cab. The night was quiet now, save for the rhythmic chug of the idling diesels. I walked toward the trapped SUV. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He wasn't a kid this time. He was older, wearing a charcoal suit that cost 5 figures, his face twisted in a snarl of corporate entitlement. "Do you have any idea who I represent?" he shouted, his voice thin against the heavy thrum of the trucks. "You're interfering with a private security detail. You're going to lose your CDL, your truck, and your freedom." I walked right up to him. I didn't stop until I was in his personal space. I could see the sweat on his upper lip. Behind me, Miller and 4 other drivers climbed down from their cabs, their heavy flashlights held like clubs, their faces grim. We weren't a mob, we were a jury. "You represent a group of men who think they can burn a city to build a kingdom," I said. My voice was calm, but it had the edge of a cold chisel. "You think because you have a contract and a lobbyist, the rules of the road don't apply to you. But here's the thing about the road. It's the only place where the truth still has weight." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the blackened grounding strap I'd taken from the vault. I dropped it at his feet. It hit the pavement with a heavy metallic thud. "That's the physical proof of sabotage," I said. "And while my friends here were boxing you in, I was uploading the dashcam footage of your attempt to run me off the road, along with the audio of your friend in the basement, to every major news outlet in the state. By the time you get back to your office, the Phoenix Initiative is going to be a lead weight around your neck." The man looked at the grounding strap, then at the circle of truckers surrounding him. For the first time, I saw the realization hit him. He wasn't dealing with a software glitch. He was dealing with people. "You can't prove anything," he stammered, but the bravado was gone. "I don't have to," I said. I leaned in closer, my voice a whisper. "The people in those hospitals, the families who sat in the dark tonight, they're going to be the ones asking the questions. And unlike you, they don't care about your architectural complexity. They just care about the truth." I turned my back on him and looked at Miller. I gave a single, sharp nod. One by one, the truckers climbed back into their rigs. The air horns gave one final defiant blast. I walked back to my peat, the weight of the night finally starting to settle into my bones. As I pulled away, leaving the SUV stranded in the middle of the bridge, I saw the first blue and red lights of the state troopers appearing in the distance. They weren't there for me. The city was fully awake now. The lights were steady. The heartbeat was strong. I had 400 miles left on my log, and a sun that was just starting to peek over the Atlantic. The sun didn't rise with a bang. It bled into the sky, a soft wash of grey and gold that made the dew on my side mirrors glisten like diamonds. I pulled into a small dirt turnout overlooking the valley, the engine ticking as it cooled, a rhythmic sound that always reminds me of a resting heart. For a long time, I just sat there, my hands resting on the wheel, watching the city below wake up. From this high up, you couldn't see the corruption, the grease-stained vaults, or the men who tried to trade human lives for a bigger bottom line. You just saw the smoke from breakfast fires and the steady, flickering pulse of a grid that was doing what it was meant to do, keeping people warm, keeping them safe, and keeping them connected. I thought about the hospital. I thought about the silence that must have fallen over those rooms when the lights came back on, the collective sigh of relief from people who didn't even know my name. That's the thing about the road. Most of the time, you're just a ghost in a machine, a shadow passing through someone else's life at 65 miles per hour. But every once in a while, the universe decides you're the only one standing between the dark and the light. It's not about being an expert or having a title. It's about being there when the hum stops and having the grit to start it back up again. I wiped a bit of basement grime off my knuckle and started the peat. I had a long way to go, and the road was calling, but for the first time in a long time, the weight of the haul felt light. Sometimes the world needs a genius, but most nights it just needs a man who isn't afraid to get his hands dirty for a stranger. If this story reminded you that some things are worth standing up for, no matter how much time has passed, hit that subscribe button and join the convoy. We're building a community here of people who believe in honor, the truth, and looking out for the person in the lane next to you. Drop an iron in the comments if you've ever had to face down a ghost of your own. And if you want, tell us about it. It's an honor to have you riding. I'll see you on the next haul. Stay safe out there.